So we're back. This is going to be like part of my story.
And part of your story.
My story. It's like my whole story.
Obviously, it's not your whole story because it's not finished yet. Are you dead?
But I call mine a story, not a testimony. It's just I don't know. It's just what I've always done my whole life. So when I was a little backstory. I don't know my biological father, and it's just a simple fact. But I do have an amazing man that stepped into my life when I was 3, and I call him Dad, and I'm so thankful for him. He walked me down the aisle. He's an amazing person, and so I always say that to anybody that's out there struggling that doesn't know their biological father. Even though I did have an amazing man step up, I do know what that is like, and the things that go through your heads and the thoughts. And it's something I've just always had. And when I was little, I was ashamed of that, because I was like, man, I'm really hurting the man that stepped up and called me Dad when I tell people I don't know my biological father. And it was when I was in college when God and me had a real deal conversation about it, when I finally was very brutally honest with myself, and God was like, I didn't let you walk through that for you not to share it. And I was like, okay. So I got more faith about it and started sharing it a little bit, and now I tell when people ask, which honestly, if you met my dad, who I call Dad, you would never know that he's not my dad. People when I was little, they'd be like, you look so much like him. And
I didn't know Jerry wasn't her dad until she told me.
Yeah. And so that's very comforting to me. But so not knowing my biological father is not my story, but it is a small piece. It's information. But my real story is that 3, I was diagnosed with cerebral palsy. So I was born in 1998. So you know what medicine was back then. So 2001-ish, my mom took me to a UK hospital clinic thing, and she said, I think my kid has cerebral palsy and I wanted you to test her. And the doctor was like, no, she doesn't have that. And it really wasn't that common when I've done all my research, in the 90s, 2000s. It wasn't a common diagnosis. And how you diagnose this is ultimately a brain scan. And so they ran the MRI on 3-year-old Elizabeth, and they came back to my mom, and she said they apologized and said, I'm sorry. And back then, cerebral palsy really was kind of like a death sentence when I got a hold of all my records. When I got older, it kind of looks, when you scroll through them and read through them and flip through them, it's like a death sentence, and that's kind of how it was written back then. And I remember we met this amazing doctor named Laura Jacks, and I will sing her praises until the day I die. And ultimately, she was placed in my life because of God, and I fully give God credit for her coming into my life. But I also give her credit because she was an amazing doctor who made a lot of bold decisions. And when you read back through my medical records, it's this patient will never walk, this patient will never drive, this patient potentially could be dead, blah, blah. And it's all these scary things. And I remember being young and not having those fears. But looking back now, I'm if I walked through that and read that as an adult, I'd be so scared. So I'm so glad I walked through that as a child and had my childlike faith, because childlike faith is crazy, because as a child you really believe you can do anything because nobody's knocked you down yet. Life's not got down to you yet. And so I did surgeries. We did Botox, and it's crazy when you read part of my report because it says Botox has not worked on other patients, but for some reason it worked on Elizabeth. And I can give it all the credit to Jesus for that one, because there is no science behind why it worked on me and it didn't work on other patients. And it's so funny because I'm actually go to a church right now and there's a cerebral palsy patient. And his mom has told me, Botox doesn't work on him. They're going to try it again, but it's not worked thus far. And I'm like, but it worked for me. And that's like God. And I'm like, oh my gosh, he was there. And I remember being so young and my parents raising me up in faith. And I'd put my hands on the TV when T.D. Jakes was preaching. They called me once. And I'll never forget it. It's a core memory. I don't even know if my parents remember it. If they ever watch these videos, they're going to be like, what? But they called me from upstairs because they were watching a live T.D. Jakes broadcast. And I put he said, if you needed a miracle, put your hands on the screen. And when I was young, I really, truly thought my miracle was going to be I no longer had CP. And I got like a wake-up call from God because that was not my miracle. I still have cerebral palsy, still deal with that. But I can say I don't have as bad a case as some. And that's the thing about CP. It's such a broad spectrum. And so I think, and I remember praying to God, like, heal me, heal me. And I always thought my healing was going to be one way, and it wasn't. And so I dealt with that a lot. And it wasn't honestly until recently that God really dealt with me. And he was like, this is something you got to go through. And then a couple weeks, probably a month and a half ago now, we were sitting at church and I'm going through some medical things and again, praying for a miracle. And because it doesn't look like on this earth how this is happening. It doesn't look good. And I'm like, I've been in this situation before with CP. This is something different. And I remember I needed a boost in my morale, in my faith, in just a lot of different things. And they played this scene from The Chosen, season 3, where he was talking to little James, who actually does have cerebral palsy in real life. So I was like, God, you're really good, because that's what I needed in that moment, was a reminder. And God's just talking to little James about, imagine if I don't heal you like I've healed everybody else. Imagine how many people you're going to change, because I can heal thousands of people and that's a great story and it's a miracle and it's amazing. But I don't heal you and you still tell the good news. How much more amazing is that? And I was like, wow, God, I really needed that reminder, because it does get hard. It does get hard when you go every day and you show up and you pray faithfully and you go to the doctor's appointments and you go to the altar and you're praying and you're fasting and you're believing and you're coming together with your sister and your brother and just your church and just everybody you can imagine. Just pray for me, pray for me, pray for me. And you go back and you get worse news than what you got before, and you're like, it doesn't look good and it doesn't feel good. And so that was like a huge part of like my testimony, my story, but also a really huge part is that at 3, so back in the day, I know what my parents were talking about. There was this little screen that sat in their room upstairs, and it was like video cameras to the rest of our house, and they could see what's going on. That's how they kept eyes on us as little kids, because obviously kids are bad sometimes, and they gonna lie, and so you need proof. And they said that I was downstairs and had all my teddy bears and dolls and everything lined up on the couch, and I was saying, you need Jesus, you need Jesus, you need Jesus. And somehow the conversation came back up about, hey, Elizabeth, what were you doing? And I was like, I'm going to be a preacher one day at 3 years old. And so God has laid that, because obviously at 3 I didn't know what that was. And when I was young, I really didn't know what that was either. But I told people I wanted to be a pastor, not knowing like exactly like what role God would put me in. But I had this dream to own my own church and preach. And I've had family members tell me, can you sing? And I'm like, yes, question mark. And they're like, you should do that and leave the pastoring to a man. I've had people tell me like, no, that's not of God. I've had the sideways looks. I've had the people tell me, maybe your husband, and you be a pastor's wife. I've had it all said to me. And so it doesn't knock me down. I do truly believe that God equips anybody to share the good news. He said, go and make disciples. He did not say, hey, only you go make disciples. He said, everybody go and make disciples. And he used women in his ministry a lot. And so if I get hate for saying I want to be a pastor on a public platform,
Wouldn't be the first time.
I still love you. But, and then like a huge part of my story is I went to college. I got my Christian ministries degree. And I met the love of my life.
I was wondering.
I was a sophomore and he was a freshman. And God made a pair when he was making us, because I have been raised in church my whole life. I've been baptized, saved since I was little. And he comes from a divorced family. And do you like want to tell, like, because like you want to tell how like your church life upbringing was, and then I'll take over again.
Well, I was going to, but then I waited too long. Do you want me to cut it?
Okay, so he was like raised in church. His parents.
We're gonna have to cut it if I asked if I was gonna cut it. I'll put a blooper reel.
No, Cole, because I just wanted this to be one swift taking.
Then why don't you come to me?
So, his family, he comes from a divorced family, and his parents, he went to church when they were little, and then his parents got divorced, and he said they just kind of like, they went for a little bit, and then they stopped going, and he went with his grandparents a lot. He talks about that, and then he stopped going altogether, and he kind of just was like, I don't want to do this. I don't believe you're real. You can't be good. And he'll tell a lot more of his testimony, because that's not everything. That's not why he turned his back on God. A lot more is in the story. But then we met, and he was a freshman, and I'd seen him a couple times on campus, and me and my roommate were like, hey, ha ha ha, and just kind of like, hey, we'd seen him a couple times. And by a couple times, I do mean twice. I met him in the calf. I've seen him in the calf, across the calf twice. And then I go, and the other time was when I watched him get saved. I was there when he got saved. I was involved, and he went up, and I remember Carol Weddle was preaching. The story is kind of on my Facebook page.
Posted it.
I posted it when he got baptized this year. But so I met him, I watched him get baptized, and then I walked into a Bible study, and there he sat. And then I went and found him on Instagram, and then he liked a bunch of my photos. So I was like, okay, well, I'll play this game. I liked him back. And then he liked some of mine, so I liked some of his back. And then I was like, I told my roommate, Bree, at the time, I was like, if he doesn't respond, if he doesn't message me, I'm going to send a message. And then I go inside Walmart. I don't think much about it. And
You went to Walmart, yeah? You went to McDonald's.
no, McDonald's is where I read your message. So I went to Walmart, put my phone in my back pocket. I didn't think much more about it. And then we were getting out of Walmart, and I picked my phone up, and I was like, oh my gosh, he messaged me. And so we're driving to McDonald's, and I'm getting giddy and nervous. And then I texted him, and he texted me back, and the McDonald's worker's trying to hand me sweet tea through my roommate. And instead of like logically thanking, I take the sweet tea, instead of taking it, I like shove it back, and like it goes to the worker because I'm shoving so hard. I'm like, a cute boy texted me. And then like I get my sweet tea back, and it's like busted, and they're like, what?
Crazy.
So we get more sweet tea, and then we leave. And so that is
I should have known.
that's kind of our story. And then we hung out the whole night, and then he was like, hey, you want to be my lady? He actually said, he said, do you want to like date? And I said like, date like boyfriend, girlfriend? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, yeah.
What's wrong with you?
And then after he asked me to be his girlfriend, he said, here's my number. And he gave me the wrong number because we were just messaging on Instagram. And then he gave me the wrong number.
You just got a new phone.
It'd been months. It was not like new. It'd been months. It was pushing almost a year. And the person texts back, who is this? And he said soccer balls. And I was like, bro, I was just going to say wrong number. And he then gave me his real number, and he was like, "Oh, I'm sorry." And I was like, "Hey," and he was like, "Hey." And then the rest is history. We got married, and we're here.
Ain't looked back since.
So yeah, that's just like my testimony in like a really quick smidge at a time. My story. I don't really think like there's much else, is there?
I mean, I'm sure as we talk about other things, more details will be brought forth.
About our lives, but for right now, like
that's it.
that's my story.